Did you ever look at someone and think you knew exactly who they were only to realize you'd been staring at a stranger the entire time? The rain hammered against the bulletproof glass like 1,000 urgent whispers. Inside the black SUV, Alina Sokolov sat perfectly still, her reflection ghosting across the tinted window, a woman carved from composure, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Outside, Stockholm's financial district blurred into streaks of neon and shadow. She didn't flinch when thunder cracked overhead. She'd learned not to flinch at anything anymore. In the driver's seat, Nikolai Volkov kept his eyes on the road, his jaw set in that familiar hard line she'd come to recognize over the past 6 months. He was exactly what she'd paid for: silent, efficient, invisible, until the moment he needed to be a wall between her and the world. Her father's company had enemies. Wealthy men always did. And after the incident in Prague, after the photograph slipped under her hotel door showing her every movement for 3 days straight, hiring personal security wasn't paranoia. It was survival. She studied the back of his head, the military precision of his haircut, the way his hands rested on the wheel, relaxed but ready. Nikolai never spoke unless spoken to, never smiled, never showed her anything beyond the professional mask of a man trained to take bullets for money. It should have been comforting. This distance, this clarity of transaction. So why did she keep noticing the small things? The way he always opened doors with his left hand, keeping his right free. The scar that disappeared beneath his collar when he turned his head. How he drank his coffee black at 4 in the morning before their earliest flights. Standing by the kitchen window of whatever hotel they'd landed in, watching the sunrise like he was memorizing something he might never see again. Alina told herself it meant nothing. Bodyguards were supposed to be observant. She was simply returning the favor. The SUV turned into the underground packing garage of her apartment, building 16 floors of steel and glass overlooking the water, each residence a fortress of privacy and privilege. As they descended into the fluorescent-lit depths, Alina gathered her briefcase, already mentally cataloging tomorrow's meetings. The merger with the German automotive firm, the board presentation, the carefully worded press release about her father's expanding health issues that never quite revealed how serious things had become. Nikolai parked in her reserved spot and was around to her door before she could reach for the handle, always like clockwork. She stepped out, heels clicking against concrete, and felt the familiar weight of his presence behind her, close enough to react, far enough to respect boundaries that had been drawn in invisible ink the day he'd started. They walked the private elevator in silence. It was always silent. 6 months of mornings and evenings, of international flights and late-night returns, of standing in the same rooms and breathing the same air, and they'd barely exchanged 100 words that weren't strictly necessary. The elevator doors slid open. They stepped inside. Alina pressed the button for the 16th floor, and as the elevator began its smooth ascent, she caught their reflection in the polished brass panel. 2 figures suspended in golden light. Her, with her dark hair pulled back severely, the exhaustion she hid so well beginning to show in the faint shadows beneath her eyes. Him, standing at parade rest, face unreadable, that same infuriating calm he wore like armor. "You don't have to walk me to the door every night," she said suddenly, surprising herself. Her voice sounded too loud in the enclosed space. "I'm safe once I'm in the building." Nikolai's eyes flicked to hers in the reflection. For a heartbeat she thought she saw something shift in his expression, something almost human. Then it was gone. "Protocol, Miss Sokolov." Of course, protocol. Everything was protocol. The elevator chimed softly, doors opening to the hushed luxury of the 16th floor. Only 2 residences up here. Hers, and the elderly ambassador who was currently in Geneva. Complete privacy. Complete isolation. They walked a short hallway to her door, and Alina fumbled with her keys, an unusual moment of clumsiness that irritated her. She was never clumsy. But something about tonight felt different. The air felt heavier, or maybe she was just tired of pretending she didn't notice how Nikolai's presence had stopped feeling like surveillance and started feeling like something else entirely. She found the right key, slid it into the lock. "Nikolai," she said, and this time she turned to face him fully. "Can I ask you something?" He went very still. In 6 months she'd never asked him anything personal, never crossed that line. "Of course. Why did you take this job?" The question tumbled out before she could stop it. "Your former military, special forces, if I had to guess. You could work anywhere, for anyone. Why private security? Why, me?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. The hallway stretched between them, expensive and empty. She could hear her own heartbeat. Then Nikolai's expression changed just slightly. Just enough. The mask didn't crack, but something behind it shifted, like watching light move beneath ice. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the most dangerous missions are the ones where you're trying to protect something, not destroy it." Alina's breath caught. There was weight in those words, layers she couldn't quite pass. Before she could respond, before she could ask what he meant, his entire demeanor changed. His hand moved to his earpiece and the professional curtain slammed back down so fast it made her dizzy. "Stay behind me." His voice was sharp now, commanding. "Don't move." "What?" "Miss Sokolov." He was already between her and the elevator, his body angled, one hand inside his jacket, where she knew he kept his gun. There's someone else in the building. The lights in the hallway flickered once, then everything went dark. In the suffocating darkness, Elena's world contracted to three things: the sound of her own breathing, the solid warmth of Nikolai's shoulder blade pressed against her chest, and the metallic taste of fear coating her tongue. She'd been threatened before anonymous emails, veiled warnings from competitors. That incident in Progbet, this was different. This was her home, her sanctuary, the one place she was supposed to be untouchable. Nikolai's hand found hers in the blackness, his grip firm and grounding. He pulled her backward, away from the elevator, moving with a certainty that suggested he could navigate this hallway blind. Maybe he'd memorized it. Maybe that was part of his protocol, too, learning every exit, every corner, every shadow where danger might hide. Her back hit the wall beside her apartment door. Nikolai released her hand, and she heard rather than saw him moving, the whisper of fabric, the subtle click of a safety being released. Somewhere below them, emergency lighting flickered on in the stairwell. She could see the faint green glow seeping beneath the fire door at the end of the hall. But their floor remained submerged in darkness, and the silence was worse than any sound could have been. Is it just a power outage? Elena whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. The building has backup generators. Nikolai's response came from somewhere to her left now, barely audible. They should have engaged immediately. This was deliberate. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. How did someone get in? That's what concerns me. There was something in his tone, not just professional alertness, but something personal. Something almost like guilt. Before Elena could process what that meant, she heard it. Footsteps, slow and measured, coming from the stairwell. Not hurried, not cautious. Simply ... inevitable. The fire door opened with a groan of hinges that seemed to stretch forever. A silhouette appeared in the green emergency lighting, tall and broad-shouldered, backlit so his features remained hidden. He didn't rush forward, didn't call out. Just stood there, radiating a patience that was somehow more terrifying than violence. Nikolai Volkov, the voice that emerged from the darkness, was rough. Accented Russian like Nikolai's, but harder, shaped by cigarettes and cold winters. It's been a long time. Elena felt Nikolai go rigid beside her. Not the controlled stillness of a professional, but something raw. Recognition. Dmitri. The name fell from Nikolai's lips like a stone into deep water. This isn't your concern, isn't it? The silhouette Dmitri took one step forward, and the emergency lighting caught the edge of his face. Scarred, weathered, the face of a man who'd survived things that should have killed him. You disappeared, brother. 3 years. No word, no explanation. And then I find you here, playing babysitter to oligarch daughters. Brother, the word hung in the air, heavy with implication. I left that life, Nikolai said, and Elena could hear the strain beneath his careful control. You should have too. Left. Dmitri laughed, a sound without humor. You don't leave, you know that. You just drag the ghosts with you wherever you go. Another step closer. But I'm not here for you. Not yet. I'm here because someone paid very good money for information about Miss Sokolov's schedule, her security protocols, her vulnerabilities, and when I dug into who was protecting her ... double quotes, he paused, and Elena could feel his attention shift to her, assessing. Well, that's when this job became interesting. Elena's mind raced. Someone had hired this man to gather intelligence about her, but who and why did Nikolai's presence matter? Get out. Nikolai's voice had dropped to something dangerous, something Elena had never heard from him before. Now while you still can, still the hero. Dmitri sounded almost sad. Even after everything, even after what they did to you. Tell me, do you still see her face when you close your eyes? Do you still hear enough? The single word cracked through the darkness like a gunshot. Dmitri went silent. The moments stretched, taut as a wire. Then he chuckled softly. I'll go. But not because you asked, because my employer wanted information, not confrontation. And now I have what I need. His attention fixed on Elena again, and she felt exposed, dissected by his invisible gaze. You should ask him, Miss Sokolov. Ask your loyal bodyguard why he really took this job. Ask him what he's running from. Ask him leave now. Nikolai's hand was on his weapon. Elena could hear it in the shift of his stance. We'll see each other again, Dmitri said, already backing toward the stairwell. Both of you, sooner than you think. The fire door closed behind him with a soft click, and then he was gone, dissolved back into the building's shadows like smoke. The emergency lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the main power surged back on, flooding the hallway with sudden, harsh brightness that made Elena squint. She blinked against the glare and saw Nikolai clearly for the first time since the darkness had fallen. His face was pale, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. His hand still rested on his holstered weapon, and he was staring at the fire door with an expression she couldn't begin to name. Pain, rage, something that looked almost like grief. Nikolai, her voice came out steadier than she felt. What just happened? Who was that man? What did he mean about inside? He turned to her and the professional mask was back, but it fit wrong now, like a costume hastily thrown on. We need to get you inside. Now. No. Elena planted her feet. 6 months of silence, of carefully maintained distance, of pretending this relationship was purely transactional. It shattered in an instant. You owe me an explanation. That man knew you. He called you brother. He said you were running from something. And he was here because of me. But somehow also because of you, and I am not moving until you tell me what the hell is going on. Nikolai looked at her, then really looked at her. Not through her or past her, but directly into her hand. Alina saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch, torment. The kind that came from carrying secrets that weighed more than bone could support. Miss Sokolov, Alina, the correction came sharp, definitive. If someone is targeting me because of you, I think we're past formalities. He flinched, actually flinched, as if her using his first name had struck him physically. A long moment passed. The hallway hummed with recycled air and the distant sound of the city beyond the building's walls. Finally, Nikolai's shoulders dropped, just slightly, the first crack in his armor she'd ever witnessed. You're right, he said quietly. You deserve to know, but not here. Not in the hallway. He glanced at her apartment door. Inside, please, and then I'll tell you everything. Alina studied his face, searching for deception, for danger. But all she saw was exhaustion, the kind that came from holding a defensive position for too long. Slowly, she nodded and turned to unlock her door. Her hand shook slightly as she worked the key, residual adrenaline making her clumsy again. The lock turned. The door swung open to reveal her apartment exactly as she'd left it that morning, clean, minimal, expensive, and impersonal as a hotel suite. They stepped inside together, and Nikolai immediately swept through the rooms with practiced efficiency, checking windows, closets, the balcony. When he returned to the living room where Alina waited, he looked even more worn, as if the act of securing her space had drained something vital from him. Sit, Alina said, gesturing to the sofa. It wasn't a request. To her surprise, he obeyed. Nikolai Volkov, who never sat in her presence, who maintained his post with unwavering vigilance, sank onto her gray suede couch like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Alina remained standing, arms crossed, waiting. Dmitry Kozlov, Nikolai began, his voice carefully neutral. We served together, special operations, Russian military, before I left. He wasn't lying when he called me brother, not by blood, but by bond. The kind forged when you've kept each other alive through situations that should have killed you both. And now he works for the Bratva Russian organized crime. A fixer, he gathers information, facilitates deals, occasionally handles more direct problems when his employers require it. Nikolai's hands rested on his knees, and Alina noticed they were trembling slightly. When I left the service, Dmitry tried to recruit me, said my skills were wasted on sanctioned operations, said we could make real money, answered to no one. I refused. Cut ties, thought I'd buried that part of my life, but you didn't. You can't bury it. The words came out harsh, raw. You carry it. In your sleep. In the way you can't stop checking exits. In the faces you see in crowds that might be enemies or might be ghosts. He looked up at her then, and the pain in his eyes was so naked it hurt to witness. I took this job because I thought protecting someone would be different from the work I'd done before. Thought maybe I could use what I'd been trained to do for something that mattered, something clean. Alina felt something shift in her chest, a tectonic movement of understanding. What did Dmitry mean when he asked if you still saw her face? Nikolai went very still. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear Katya. Her name was Katya. The name hung between them, fragile and heavy all at once. Our last mission before I left. We were extracting a diplomat's daughter from Chechnya. She was 19, studying abroad, got caught in the wrong place when tensions escalated. My team was sent in to get her out quietly. His voice had gone flat, mechanical, as if emotion would break him if he let it in. We almost made it. Almost, but there was an ambush. Someone had sold the information. We were compromised before we even crossed the border. 3 of my team died in the first 5 minutes. I got her to the extraction point. Carried her through a firefight, through explosions, through hell. She was terrified but trusting. Kept asking if we'd make it. I told her yes. I promised her. Elena's throat tightened. She knew how this story ended, could see it written in every tense line of Nikolai's body. The helicopter came. I got her inside, put her in the seat, strapped her in myself, and just as we were lifting off a rocket, I was blown clear. Survived by pure chance. The helicopter ... He stopped, swallowed hard. There were no survivors. Katya died believing I'd saved her. Died because I'd promised her something I couldn't deliver. That wasn't your fault, Elena said. The words automatic, inadequate. Wasn't it? Nikolai looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. I made a promise I couldn't keep and it got her killed. So when I left the military, when I walked away from everything, I swore I'd never make that mistake again. Never promise protection I couldn't guarantee. Never let someone trust me with their life unless I was absolutely certain I could. He stopped abruptly, and Alina watched understanding crash over his features like a wave. She saw the exact moment he realized what he'd just revealed, not just about his past, but about why her, why this job, why 6 months of distance and silence and refusing to be anything more than a shadow at her back, because he'd been protecting more than her body. He'd been protecting himself from the possibility of failing again, from caring again. And judging by the look on his face, he'd just realized that somewhere along the way, despite every wall he'd built, he'd failed at that too. The silence that followed Nikolai's abrupt stop was suffocating. Elena watched him rise from the couch as if pulled by invisible strings, his body reverting to that familiar rigid posture. But it looked different now, like watching someone put on armor they no longer believed in. He moved toward the window, keeping his back to her, and she understood with sudden clarity that he was giving himself a moment to rebuild the walls she'd just seen crumble. She wouldn't let him. "How long?" Elena asked, her voice cutting through the space between them like a blade. "How long have you known you were compromised?" Nikolai's shoulders tensed. "I'm not. Don't." She took a step toward him, then another. "Don't insult me with denials. Dmitri didn't find me by accident. He found me because of you. Because someone knew you were here and wanted to use that connection. So I'll ask again. How long have you known?" His reflection in the window glass showed nothing, just a dark outline against the city lights stretching beyond. 3 weeks, he finally admitted. "I noticed surveillance, small things, a car that appeared too often, the same face in 2 different locations across 4 days. Someone was tracking my movements, which meant they were tracking you. I increased security protocols, varied our routes, ran counter-surveillance. Well, I thought I'd handled it, but you didn't tell me." "No." Why? The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with something that felt uncomfortably close to betrayal. "I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting from information. This is my life, my safety. You should have. Because I was afraid you'd fire me." The words erupted from him suddenly, and he turned from the window to face her. His control was fracturing, piece by piece. "I was afraid you'd see me as the liability I am and replace me with someone clean, someone without ghosts, someone who wouldn't draw danger to you just by existing in your orbit. And I see OULDN single quotes T. He stopped, jaw working. "I couldn't leave you vulnerable. Not while there was still a threat. Not while I could still protect me," Elena finished. She was close enough now to see the war being waged behind his eyes. "Is that what you're still trying to do? Atone for Katya by keeping me safe? Make up for one failed promise by keeping another? It's not the same." But his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Elena tilted her head, studying him with the same analytical precision she used in boardrooms, except now she was analyzing something far more complex than market shares and merger agreements. "You've spent 6 months maintaining exactly enough distance to do your job while making sure you never had to acknowledge that I'm not just an assignment anymore. Maybe I never was." Nikolai went very still. "Miss Suck." Elena, her name on her own lips, felt like drawing a line in sand. "And you're going to explain to me exactly what you meant when you told Dmitri that leaving wasn't an option? What life were you running from? What did they do to you?" For a moment she thought he'd retreat behind protocol again, rebuild the professional distance that had kept them in their separate spheres for half a year. But something had shifted tonight. The darkness, the threat, the confrontation with his past had cracked something open that couldn't be sealed again. "After Katya died, after I left the military, I tried to go home," Nikolai said, and his voice had taken on that flat quality again, like he was reciting someone else's story. "Back to Moscow, thought maybe I could find something normal, a regular life. But men like Dmitri knew what I'd done, what I was capable of. The Bradford doesn't let talent walk away. They made offers, then they made threats. When I kept refusing, they made examples. My sister," he stopped, the muscle in his jaw jumping again. "They didn't hurt her. They were smarter than that. They just made sure she knew I was the reason she was being watched, that her children were being photographed on their way to school, that if anything happened to her family, it would be because of me." Elena felt ice forming in her stomach. "So you ran?" "So I ran," he confirmed. "Changed my name. Used old military contacts to build a new identity. Moved west. Found work doing the only thing I knew how to do." He met her eyes directly now, and what she saw there was devastating. "I thought if I kept moving, kept my head down, stayed invisible, they'd forget about me. Write me off as not worth the effort. I thought protecting people like you, people with resources, with their own security concerns, would keep me buried in a world they couldn't touch. I was wrong. Dmitri found you anyway." Dmitri was always the best tracker I knew. Something that might have been respect flickered across Nikolai's features. "If he's here, if he's asking questions, it means someone higher up the chain has taken interest." And that means he stopped mid-sentence, his hand going to his earpiece reflexively, even though he wasn't wearing it. Old habits. Then his expression changed, sharpened. He pulled his phone from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and Elena watched his face go pale. "What is it?" Instead of answering, he turned the phone toward her. On the screen was a photograph, time-stamped 20 minutes ago. It showed Elena and Nikolai in her hallway, illuminated by emergency lighting, standing close enough that it looked intimate, her hand on his arm, his face turned toward hers. The image had been taken from the stairwell, Dmitri's angle. Below the photo, a message in Russian. Nikolai's hands tightened on the phone, and Elena saw fury and fear war across his features. "What does it say?" she demanded. "It says, she's beautiful. I see why you stayed." Nikolai's voice was hollow. "And then it says, they're coming tomorrow. If you want to keep her breathing, you'll cooperate." The words settled over the room like fallout. Elena felt her heartbeat accelerate, that analytical part of her mind already calculating threats, options, escape routes. But another part, the part that had been quietly observing Nikolai for 6 months, noticing small things, wondering about the man behind the mask, that part was fixated on something else entirely. Who's coming? She asked. What do they want? Your father's company holds assets in Eastern Europe. Mining rights, energy contracts, things that certain people would very much like to control. Nikolai was already moving, pulling his laptop from his bag, fingers flying across the keyboard. If I had to guess, this was never just about gathering information. Dmitri's employers want leverage. They want your father to sign over certain holdings, and threatening his daughter would be an effective motivator. So this is about business. Elena heard herself say the words, but they felt distant, disconnected. Not about you. Nikolai looked up from his screen, and the expression on his face told her everything. It's about both now. They know I care about. He stopped himself, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air between them, unspoken but deafening. They know I won't let anything happen to you, which makes you leverage against me, and me leverage against you. It's brilliant, really. Corner us both with a single move. Elena's mind was racing, but not toward escape routes or security protocols. Instead, she was replaying 6 months of moments. The way Nikolai always positioned himself between her and doors, how he'd insisted on checking her apartment before she entered, every single night, even when it seemed paranoid. The coffee he'd started leaving on her desk in the mornings, exactly how she liked it, without ever being asked. Small acts of consideration that went beyond duty. And something Dmitri had said, echoing now in the silence. Ask him why he really took this job. You didn't take this job randomly, did you? The realization hit her like cold water. You researched me, chose me specifically. Nikolai went very still. She could see him calculating whether to lie, whether there was any point in maintaining the fiction. Finally, he nodded once. Yes. Why? Because you were supposed to be safe. The words came out raw, honest. You had threats, but they were abstract. Corporate rivals. Nothing I couldn't handle. You had resources, which meant proper security, infrastructure, and most importantly, you were scheduled to be in Western Europe for 6 months. Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, far from anyone who might recognize me. Far from my past. It was supposed to be perfect, clean, temporary enough that I could move on before anyone got hurt. But you stayed. Elena heard herself say. It felt the weight of the statement. After the initial contract ended, you renewed for another 6 months. Yes, just the one word, but it contained multitudes. Why? She asked again, but this time the question meant something different. This time she was asking about everything, about every morning coffee, every careful distance maintained, every moment of protection that had started feeling less like duty and more like devotion. Nikolai set his laptop aside and stood. He crossed the distance between them slowly, deliberately, until he was close enough that Elena could see flecks of gold in his gray eyes, could smell the faint scent of gunmetal and cologne that had become familiar without her realizing it. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, because somewhere between Prague and Stockholm, between checking doors and watching you work yourself to exhaustion over mergers you didn't even want, I stopped seeing you as an assignment. His hand rose, hesitated in the air between them, then fell back to his side. And that terrified me more than any threat I've ever faced, because caring means vulnerability, means the possibility of failing again, means... His phone buzzed again. Once, twice, 3 times, in rapid succession. Nikolai glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor changed, combat readiness flooding back into his frame. We need to leave now. What? Why? Security feeds. He was already moving, pulling go bags from the closet she hadn't known contained them, checking weapons with practiced efficiency. The building's underground garage. 3 vehicles just entered, none of them residents. They're not waiting until tomorrow. Dmitri's message was a misdirection. They're here now. Elena felt adrenaline spike through her system, sharpening everything. How long do we have? Minutes. Maybe less if they override the elevator. Nikolai threw her a small backpack, passport, cash, phone, anything you absolutely need. 30 seconds. She moved on autopilot, her hand steady even as her heart hammered. Passport from the bedroom safe, phone already in her pocket. The leather portfolio containing documents for tomorrow's meetings. No, not tomorrow anymore, maybe not ever. She grabbed it anyway, some part of her refusing to let go of normal, even as normal disintegrated around her. When she returned to the living room, Nikolai had transformed. Gone was the man who'd stood close enough to touch, who'd almost let his guard down completely. In his place stood the operator, the soldier, the weapon she'd hired without fully understanding what that meant. He had a gun in each hand, was checking sight lines to the door, calculating angles and approaches with the cold efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Service stairs, he said without looking at her. Down to the 14th floor, then across to the east tower, down their stairs to the street exit. There's a car waiting 2 blocks north. You planned this, it wasn't a question. I always have an exit strategy. Now he did look at her, and despite the tactical focus, despite the immediate danger, she saw something else in his eyes. something that made her chest tight. Always, a sound from the hallway. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose. They were out of time. Nikolai grabbed her hand the first time he touched her beyond professional necessity and pulled her toward the kitchen. Behind the pantry door was something she'd never noticed, a service access panel, just wide enough for a person. He wrenched it open, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor beyond, dimly lit and smelling of dust and old paint. Go, he ordered. Straight through until you hit the stairwell. Don't stop, don't look back. Alina stepped into the corridor but turned back. What about you? I'll be right behind you. But something in his voice made it sound like a lie, like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Alina, I need you too. The sound of her apartment door exploding inward cut off whatever he was about to say. The maintenance corridor swallowed Alina whole, its narrow walls pressing in from both sides as she ran. Behind her, the sounds of chaos erupted, shouts in Russian, furniture overturning, Nikolai's voice cutting through it all with commands she couldn't understand. Then a gunshot, sharp and final, and her heart stopped. But footsteps followed, heavy and fast, and she knew with certainty that was him behind her, that he'd kept his promise, that he was still protecting her even as everything fell apart. She hit the stairwell door at full speed, Nikolai's hand between her shoulder blades, steadying her, guiding her. They descended in controlled chaos, taking stairs 3 at a time, 14 floors blurring into 13 into 12. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop, because Nikolai was there at her back and his presence was the only thing keeping terror from swallowing her completely. On the 8th floor, he pulled her into another corridor, this one leading to the east tower just as he'd planned. They could hear pursuit above them now, multiple sets of feet, coordinated and determined. But the pursuers didn't know the building like Nikolai did, didn't have his preparation, his paranoia that had turned out to be wisdom. They emerged onto a service landing. And through a grimy window, Alina caught a glimpse of Stockholm spread below them, thousands of lights. Thousands of lives continuing in peaceful ignorance while hers spiraled into violence. The contrast felt surreal, like looking at a photograph of someone else's reality. Keep moving, Nikolai breathed, but his hand found hers again, squeezed once. Reassurance, promise, the touch of someone who understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to keep moving through it. The East Tower stairs were older, narrower, unused except for maintenance. They took them in near darkness, feeling their way down, and Alina realized with strange clarity that she trusted him completely. Trusted him to know the way. Trusted him to keep her safe. Trusted him with her life in a way that went far beyond the contract they'd signed 6 months ago. They burst out into a service alley behind the building, the night air hitting Elena's face like a slap. Nikolai didn't slow, pulling her through shadows, through gaps between buildings that she would never have noticed, moving with the fluid certainty of someone who'd mapped every escape route before he'd ever needed one. 2 blocks north, just as he'd said, a nondescript sedan waited with keys hidden in the wheel well. Only when they were inside, doors locked, engine running, Stockholm's streets flowing past them in a river of light and motion, did Nikolai finally exhale. His hands were steady on the wheel, but Alina could see the tremor starting in his shoulders, the adrenaline crash beginning. Are you hurt? She asked, her voice sounding strange in her own ears. No. He glanced at her, a quick assessment. You know. She looked down at her hands, surprised to find them shaking. The reality of what had just happened was beginning to settle, heavy and undeniable. Where are we going? Airport. There's a private charter waiting. Filed under a shell company. We'll be in London before anyone realizes which direction we went. He merged onto a highway, the sedan anonymous among late-night traffic. I have contacts there, people who can help keep you safe while we figure out what Alina interrupted. How to make this go away. How to negotiate with people who broke into my home. How to go back to some version of normal that doesn't exist anymore. She heard the edge in her voice, something sharp and brittle. They have my face now, Nikolai. Your face. Dmitri has photographs. Evidence that we single quotes double quotes. She trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence. Connected, Nikolai supplied quietly. Yes, they'll use that. So what do we do? For a long moment, he didn't answer. The highway stretched ahead of them, arrows of light pointing toward an airport and a future neither of them could see clearly. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Alina turn to look at him fully. We stopped running, he said. Both of us. Alina felt something shift in her chest. What does that mean? It means I've been running for 3 years, and it hasn't solved anything. Every time I think I've put enough distance between myself and my past, it finds me anyway. Finds the people I... double quotes. He stopped, jaw tightening. Finds the people I care about. And you've been running too, haven't you? From your father's expectations. From the company you never wanted to inherit. From every person who's ever tried to get close to you because all they saw was money and access. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Alina thought about her pristine apartment, beautiful and cold as a museum. Her carefully managed schedule that left no room for anything spontaneous or uncertain. The way she'd built her entire life around control and distance, never quite admitting that she was just as much a prisoner as she was an heiress. What are you suggesting? She asked carefully. I'm suggesting we face this together. Nikolai's hands tightened on the wheel. I have information Dimitri's employers want knowledge about their operations from my military days. Connections I made, operations I witnessed. That's why they've never stopped looking for me, not because I'm a threat, but because I'm valuable. And you have something they want to her father's company, his assets, his influence. Separately, we're leveraged against each other. Together, we might actually have enough power to negotiate our way out. Elena's mind began working through the implications, that analytical part of her calculating odds and outcomes. You want to make a deal with the Bratva. I want to make a deal that gives us both our lives back. Real lives, not this half-existence of looking over shoulders and maintaining distance and pretending we don't. He stopped himself again, but Elena heard what he didn't say, echoing in the space between them. The airport appeared on the horizon, a constellation of lights against the darkness. Nikolai took an exit that led to private terminals, away from commercial traffic and crowds. As they drove through security gates, Elena made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. When this is over, she said quietly. When we've negotiated our way out of this mess and I'm no longer in immediate danger, what happens to us? Nikolai pulled into a parking spot near a small hangar where a jet waited, engines already warming. He killed the engine but didn't immediately move to exit. Instead, he turned to face her fully, and in the dim light of the parking lot, Elena saw everything written across his features. Fear, hope, the weight of 6 months of professional distance and personal longing. I don't know, he admitted. For 6 months I've told myself that keeping you safe was enough. That being near you, even from a distance, was more than I deserved after failing Katya. That if I could just make it to the end of your contract without getting you hurt, maybe I could prove to myself that IWASN single quotes T dot double quotes. He trailed off, struggling. That I wasn't broken beyond repair. You're not broken, Elena said, and was surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. You're carrying damage. That's different. We all carry damage. Some of us just hide it better. Is that what you've been doing, hiding yours? The question caught her off guard, but she recognized its truth. My mother died when I was 12. Car accident. After that, my father threw himself into building his empire, and I learned that love meant loss, that caring about people meant giving them the power to destroy you. So I stopped caring. Built walls, made myself into exactly what he needed, cold, efficient, ruthless in business. I told myself I was successful, accomplished, but really I was just double quotes. She paused, searching for words, safe and lonely, and convinced that was the same thing as strong. Nikolai reached across the space between them, and this time when his hand found hers, there was nothing professional about it. His fingers laced through hers, warm and certain. We're quite a pair, he said with something that might have been a smile. Both running from ghosts, both trying to protect ourselves by pretending we don't need anyone. So what now? Elena asked. Do we stop pretending? I think we have to, because those people who broke into your apartment tonight, they saw what I've been trying to hide for 6 months, that you're not just a job to me. That somewhere between bodyguard and protected, I crossed a line I swore I'd never cross again. His thumb traced patterns on the back of her hand, unconscious and intimate. I care about you, Elena, not as an assignment, not as atonement, as you. And that terrifies me because it means I could fail you. It means I could lose you the way I lost. You won't, Elena interrupted. Because I'm not Katya, I'm not someone who needs rescuing. I'm someone who chooses to stand beside you. There's a difference. Nikolai studied her face as if trying to memorize it, or maybe seeing it clearly for the first time. You make it sound simple. Nothing about this is simple. There are people who want to use us against each other, a threat that won't disappear just because we've acknowledged what's been building between us. Elena squeezed his hand. But simple and right aren't always the same thing. And this, whatever this is, feels right in a way nothing has in a very long time. Through the windshield, Elena could see the pilot emerging from the hangar, signaling that they were ready for departure. Minutes from now, they'd be in the air, heading toward London and whatever negotiations awaited them there. Heading toward a future that was uncertain and dangerous and nothing like the carefully controlled life she'd built. And yet, sitting in this car with Nikolai's hand in hers, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not safety, exactly, but something better. Partnership. The knowledge that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. We should go, Nikolai said, but he didn't move. In a moment, Elena turned her body toward him, and in the intimate space of the sedan, with Stockholm sleeping around them, and danger still lurking in shadows, she made a choice. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his softly at first, a question then deeper when he responded, his free hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about his capacity for violence. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Nikolai rested his forehead against hers. I can't promise you safety, he whispered. I can't promise that my past won't keep coming back. I can't promise that protecting you won't sometimes mean making impossible choices. I know, Elena said, but you can promise to be honest. To let me stand beside you instead of behind you. To stop treating me like something fragile that needs guarding and start treating me like a partner. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Can you do that? For a long moment, Nikolai simply looked at her. Then, slowly, that controlled expression she'd watched him wear like armor for 6 months finally cracked completely, and underneath it was something raw and real and undeniably human. "Yes," he said simply. "I can do that." They left the car together, walking side by side toward the waiting jet. And as they climbed the stairs to an uncertain future, Elena realized something profound. She'd spent years believing that strength meant independence, that safety came from distance, that the only way to protect yourself was to need no one. But watching Nikolai move beside her, not ahead, not behind, but beside, she understood that real strength wasn't about building walls. It was about choosing who you let through them. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let someone close enough to hurt you. But sometimes, it's also the most necessary. Because life isn't measured in how well you protect yourself from pain, but in how fully you allow yourself to feel everything: joy and fear, hope and risk, the terrifying possibility that caring about someone might actually be worth the vulnerability it demands. The jet engines roared to life as they settled into their seats, and through the window Elena watched Stockholm fall away beneath them. Somewhere in that city her apartment stood violated. Somewhere people plotted and threatened and tried to use connection as leverage. But here, 30,000 feet above the complications, Nikolai's hand found hers again in the darkness, and Elena held on. She'd hired him to guard her body. Instead, somehow, impossibly, he'd found his way to guarding something far more dangerous: her heart. And in return, she'd been given the opportunity to help guard his battered and scarred and still healing, but beating steady all the same. Maybe that's what love is, in the end. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to be afraid together. Not the promise of safety, but the commitment to face danger as a team. Not walls built to keep others out, but bridges built despite the risk. The jet climbed higher, carrying them toward London and negotiations and a future that would demand everything they had. But for this moment, suspended between danger and possibility, Elena closed her eyes and allowed herself something she'd denied for too long: hope. And beside her, still holding a hand as if afraid she might disappear, a bodyguard who'd been guarding his own heart for 3 long years finally allowed himself to do the same.